Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Author Your Life. Today on the podcast, we have Anita Sauvage. As a coach, consultant, speaker, and entrepreneur, Anita is a specialist in emotional intelligence, having worked in this area for nearly 15 years. She developed her expertise in emotional intelligence, or what she likes to call emotional talents, to help leaders, entrepreneurs, and artists alike recognize, understand, and gain control over their emotions and thereby increase their professional and personal successes. She's helped many CEOs and senior leaders and managers, both in public and private sector, in Scotland and France, to develop this highly significant and often undervalued set of skills. Driven by her passion for helping others, Anita became an emotional intelligence, also known as EQ, expert. She completed an MSc in coaching, focusing her research on self-awareness. Anita is a bar on EQI 2.0, that means scientifically validated emotional intelligence assessment, and an EQI 360 certified coach. She's also an Action Learning Set certified trainer and a facilitator and associate of Action Learning Associates Limited in London, a Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People accredited facilitator, and a 16 Personality Factors certified practitioner. Bicultural and charismatic, Anita is a truly engaging coach and speaker. Her expertise and genuine love for humans make her popular among colleges, health boards, and businesses. In our interview today of Anita, you will learn the difference between an emotion, a feeling, and a mood, a simple question to reset negative emotions, the power of the pause, and how to help others find their own answers. So let's get into it. Please enjoy this interview with Anita Sauvage. Anita, welcome to the Author Your Life podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's all right. It's great to have you here. Now, Anita, why did you get interested in emotional intelligence?
That's actually quite a long story, but I will try to make it short. It all started actually quite simply by a friend of mine who offered me the book of Daniel Goleman, called EQ, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters Most Than IQ, and why it can matter most, more than IQ. So even the title, you see, I get it wrong still. And actually, when I read that book, I was very busy. I was very stressed. I had a difficult job, very challenging. I was very Latin in my behavior, should I say. So I was easily slamming doors at the office. That kind of behavior. But that was mainly because of my stress level. And this colleague of mine didn't really say anything, just smiled at me and gave me the book and told me, maybe you should read that book, maybe that would help you. And actually I got in that book very quickly, and I was very curious. It really helped me to understand so many things about myself, about my behavior. And I really wanted to learn more about emotional intelligence. So at the time, I was also starting to be interested in becoming a coach. And I just felt that the two topics were really working together for me. So I started to study a lot more. And while I was doing my study for coaching, I was also getting accredited in what we call EQI2, which is the baron. That's, I would say, one of the most popular and scientifically recognized assessment to help you understand how your behavior affects, how your emotion affects your behavior and what impact it has on others. And when I did my MSc a few years later, my MSc in coaching, I decided to actually focus on emotional intelligence and did all my research on self-awareness. So I got the bug, basically, and never stopped since then. I think it's a fascinating topic. It's so important. It's been recently, actually, the World Economic Forum, who does study about business trends and job trends, has put emotional intelligence as one of his top 10 skills for any employees to have by 2020. I don't know how we'll put that in place, but we'll try. If everybody's trying a wee bit, that should work, maybe. Live in hope, maybe, but that's me. So that's how I started in emotional intelligence.
So Anita, I was really interested to have this interview because I think this phrase emotional intelligence, it's thrown around a lot these days. It's like, oh, you've got to be emotionally intelligent, you need emotional intelligence in the workplace. We're hearing more and more about it, but perhaps what we're not so clear on, like a lot of these phrases, is actually what constitutes emotional intelligence. How do we develop emotional intelligence? Would you mind explaining a little bit more? I know this is a huge question, what is emotional intelligence, and you could spend hours talking about it. But how would you help people understand what emotional intelligence really is and how they apply it into their lives?
Okay, yes, that's a big topic. And I think, I hear a lot of people who who don't really understand the difference, first of all, between emotional intelligence, or what we call EQ and IQ. But to start with, what is emotional intelligence? It's actually our ability to understand our own emotions and the emotions of other people around us. And once you recognize them and you understand them, you can then manage them. And it really, managing these emotions and the emotions of others will help you interact more efficiently with people. And to be also a lot calmer and more understanding and more empathic. And that in itself is a good thing. But the thing is that, first of all, emotional intelligence, I don't really like the term. What does it mean? Being intelligent, I prefer to use the word emotionally talented.
Okay.
Because for me, it's about a talent. And when you talk about talent, it is something you will develop as you go along. That's at least for me, the definition of talent. You have a spark at the beginning. You have something that you're passionate about and you want to develop it. And that's the same with emotional talent. That's not part of your DNA. This is something you can develop. That's a skill. Something you develop as you go along. The other question people are often asking me is that, how do you master emotional intelligence or emotional talent? And I say, you never master it. If you were a master in that domain, you would be someone, you would be a robot, basically. So yes, it's not about mastering it. It's about being more self-aware. It's about also being able to put names into how you feel, into your own emotion. If you recognize this emotion, you are more likely to do something about it instead of simply reacting to things. Mm-hmm. Another point about it is, for me, sometimes people tend to interchange the word emotion, the word feeling, and the word mood. Mm-hmm. And it's true, sometimes it's the complexity of language. And I guess even in my own language, French, it's also very difficult to make a difference between the three. And I would say that for me, the difference is about time.
Right.
Because an emotion is something that will happen in your, not only in your brain, but also in your body. So that's really a chemical reaction to a specific situation. And this whole process will go from your body to your mind, to your body to your mind. It's almost a loop. Mm-hmm. But that will take 6 seconds.
Right.
So as you can imagine, we experience emotion many, many times a day. Someone mentioned that you can experience an average of 456 emotions a day.
Wow.
Now, how they came up with that is still a big mystery for me. But what it says is that you experience a lot of emotion. Mm-hmm. Now, the way you feel it's actually a combination, that can be a combination of different emotions. And that will last longer. And then you have the mood. Now, the mood can be there for an hour, or can be there for a day, or can be there for a month. You know, for example, people who have depression, we can put it in the mood. You know, this is not about the emotion; it's about the state, the experience. So it's different things, so the emotional intelligence, it's our ability to understand and manage this immediate reaction we have to situations. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say we manage all of them.
Yeah.
Because we would be exhausted by the end of the day. But it's to try to, particularly if you can see pattern emerging, you know, if you have a specific reaction to the same situation all over again, it's really to try to understand what creates that reaction. Mm-hmm. So next time, working on it will help you to manage that impact in a different way, and often in a better way.
Right.
So I don't know if it's the answer you wanted, but
it's the answer that you thought was right, and that's all that matters. Exactly. So, diving a little bit more into this distinction, emotion, feeling, mood. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Obviously, the long-term goal for us is going to be this mood. How are we feeling over a sustained period of time? Are we overall positive? Are we overall negative? Because emotions happen to us all the time. The happiest person in the world will get emotions of sadness, of anger, of frustration, of anxiety. Mm-hmm. But what makes the difference between translating the emotions, the feelings, into a long-term sustained mood?
I would say the mood is something that is more generalized. Mm. So there are different factors that will impact on your mood. For example, for me, the weather is a big factor. You know, if I see a lot of rain, and I live in Scotland, so I'm not always seeing the sunshine. Yeah. It will affect the way I feel. If you haven't slept, your mood will be different than if you have had a good night rest. Mm-hmm. If you have eaten too much, for example, you know, you have had this massive lunch and you feel really a bit bloated, etc., that will affect your mood. So that's one thing about mood. Now it's about being aware of this factor, and you can't change the weather, but there are things you can change in your habit. If I remember a few years ago, I had really a problem with sleeping, and that was mainly due to stress and worry, etc. Now, emotional intelligence is something when you learn how to manage this anxiety, how to try to change the pattern of what you're thinking. And that will help you to rest better. Food, okay, sometimes we will still have these big lunches or big dinners and feel that we have eaten or drank too much. And that's okay. But if you have, for example, a coaching session just after, I would not advise people to do that. Because it will affect their concentration. Even that can even affect your interest in the conversation you have with people. So it's very important to be very aware of this factor and the impact they have on your mood.
What would you say then is a key skill of emotional intelligence to be? You've used the word self-aware quite a lot, to be self-aware of these things that are going on for you, and a skill that you can apply to make yourself think of them in the way that you want to think of them, and to think of them in a positive, proactive manner.
Now, there are a few things. The first one for me is about learning to monitor your inner talk. Because we kind of are our worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah.
If you have, for example, done a workshop and, you have good feedback from people, but if you tend to look at what didn't go right or what you're not satisfied about, you will never really see it as a success story. So it's really about balancing self-criticism and self-compassion. So that's an example where, okay, what are the situation and what is it that I'm not able to blow my trumpet? Because I use actually these words, blow my trumpet. Yeah. No, it's not about blowing your trumpet. It's about being kind with yourself, empathic with yourself, and recognize I've done a good job. The proof is that people are telling me I've done a good job, and if I had not, they would not have told me. Yeah. So sometimes it's just being too. The autocritic is the big thing. Another one for me is about giving yourself time to pause and reflect on situations. So I try to do that every day. It's not to say I manage to do it every day, but I will take a moment every day to think of my day and to think about the things I've done, the things that have progressed, the thing I procrastinated on also sometimes, but without feeling guilty. So removing that feeling of guilt when you have not done something. That's just a few examples. One for me that is the most important one I use when I feel that I'm in a situation where I will be not very happy, I will be sad, or I will be anxious, is to practice mindfulness, particularly mindful breathing. I guess now I tend to, because I developed that self-awareness, and self-awareness is not only about what is happening in your thought, it's also what is happening in your body. You know, if you're stressed, if you're anxious, your body will give you the sign. And it's about learning to listen to these signs, to listen to, you know, why is it that my neck is tense, or your eyes are tired, and that can be because you spend too much time on a computer. It's true, but there may be other reason. You know, you feel hot or sweat. All of these, it's realizing these signs, also being aware of them, and when it happens, it's really time to pause. And I would say that when you see the first sign happening, just pause. And mindful breathing is something I use several times a day. And that really helped me a lot. So that's just a few tips.
Yeah, they're good tips. So at these times during the day, you hit the pause button and you go through the mindful breathing. What does that process look like?
I have two. No, I have a few more than two, but my favorite two, I will say. The first one for me is actually to go for a walk. I think I'm the kind of person, it works for some, it doesn't work for others. It really depends on how you function. But my best reflection and my best idea came when I walked. So I will go for a short or a long walk. It really depends. I know when it's time to pause. I know when a walk will be a useful thing for me. So it has two interests. Is that the first one, I do believe, and it has been recognized also in not only in emotional intelligence, is that sometimes when you are anxious, you are overwhelmed, you have so many things in your mind that you feel you're stuck. It's time to declutter, but it's also time to remove yourself from the situation. So the one thing that is important is actually to physically remove yourself from the room when it happens. And it can be simply to take a cup of tea or even a few minutes, you know, going around the building, but whatever you do, it's removing yourself from the situation, and when you come back, you are refreshed. In my situation, the thing that works best for me is to go for a walk. But yes, some people will go for a cup of tea or listen to a piece of music. But it's really important to remove yourself from that situation. The other thing that really is very important to me, and it's a coach who gave me that fabulous question 10 years ago, something like that. And we were talking about how do we reflect? How do we pause and take the time to reflect, to take that time to think about ourselves? And she gave me a wonderful gift. And the question is, what do you know now that you didn't know before? And I love that sentence. For me, I remember when she gave me that sentence, it was a revelation. It was something that suddenly, you know, light for a moment. Since then, I've always used it. It's still working. You know, it's 10 years on, and it's still working. It's the power of the word, but it's also exactly what I'm trying to do in emotional intelligence, is to make people understand a bit more about themselves. And that's something, a process you can do every day or every week. You choose how often you want to do it or how often you can do it. But for me, it's something I put at the heart of my practice. I don't know if you know Stephen Covey, the
Oh, yeah,
seventh
yeah.
habit of highly effective people. Reflection for me is one of my big rocks.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do that as often as I can. So that's the two things that are on top of my list, I would say.
Yeah, I really like that question. It's almost reminding yourself of your own learning and growth, because sometimes we get, going back to what you're talking about self-talk earlier, we get so caught up in what haven't I got? What can't I do? What's not working for me at the moment? And sometimes I actually, to be honest with you, I had a moment like that today where I was getting a little bit frustrated with some tech, like my emails weren't working properly, and I can't send out this important message that I want to send out to my audience. And this was kind of catastrophizing into, because my email is not working, my next seminar is not going to go well, my business is going to fall in collapse. I was just like, David, come on. And what I actually did was I said, you weren't even doing this 5 years ago. You wouldn't be capable of doing this 5 years ago. You didn't know how to build an audience. You didn't know how to run a seminar. And that was just some really important perspective that I needed at that moment in time, to be like, to answer that question, what do you know now that you didn't know before? It's like, well, now I know how to actually do all these things. Even though I'm having a problem with it right now, it's a problem that I know how to get through and solve on the other side of the equation, not a problem where I've never been able to overcome it before, or I've never encountered it before. So I think that's a really good question, and I think I might start using that myself from now on.
Okay. I give you the gift that I was given. I try to share that sentence with a lot of people, because I think it's very powerful. And yes, it's also about what do you know about yourself that you didn't know before. If suddenly you look at it from a self-awareness perspective, you will be amazed by how much you will discover about yourself. And that's a sentence, emotional intelligence is also about developing people's self-confidence. This sentence has amazing results, because you focus on the positive of the person. And that really helps the person see their strength, their talent. Again, I come back to the word talent. And it boosts their confidence. So it's very powerful and very positive.
Pulling the discussion in a slightly different direction, I think this is a really interesting question to ask when we start talking about emotions, because stereotypically and quite often scientifically as well, we see that men and women have very different EQs. They have very different connections to their emotions, how they feel, how they express, how they manage them, how they process them. What differences have you noticed in your work between men and women?
That's actually a very big discussion just now. The idea that women have more empathy, for example, or will be better listener than men. I'm not always comfortable with that, because it's like everything. If you put a stereotype on things, there are big risks. I met many men who were actually very empathic, who had a real sense of engagement with people, a great interaction. They cared. And I've also met some women who
Didn't
who
have
were
that.
not as, yes, how can I put that diplomatically? Who maybe lacked a bit of emotional intelligence. So I would say it's still studied, but the studies are conflictual. So the results are, searchers. It's very difficult actually to answer that question. From my own my personal experience, I would say that I often have more women in my workshops than men.
Me too.
But it's also mainly because the word emotional talent or emotional intelligence is still seen as, we were saying, oh, don't be emotional not so long ago, and being emotional wasn't a very nice things to be. You were, some were comparing being emotional to being hysterical.
Yeah.
So emotional intelligence now, if you if I look at the leadership program I've worked on, I would say that men or women who really are interested in self-development will have the same interest in the topic. And will try to develop, because it's their interest also from a leadership perspective, to be more aware and to be able to interact with their staff in a positive manner. Yes, it's true that if you look at empathy, I would say that women may find it easier to be empathic than men. But again, it's always a risk because I don't like to put people in boxes. So I made very emotionally intelligent people on both sides of the gender. I'm sorry, it's not really an answer I give you.
A non-answer's still an answer, I guess.
I really make up my mind. I interrupted you. Oops.
No, if you say, are there differences, and there's not, then that is also an answer. What would you say to someone who is struggling with their emotional intelligence, who's struggling to have that connection to that emotion? How do they reconnect with that better?
So you mean someone who is not self-aware, or someone who is struggling to express their emotion?
Express their emotions. So I'm thinking of the stereotype of a man, of men not being good with their emotions, not being good with feeling emotion, not being good with expressing emotion, even though we've just said that actually, men and women can both be like that. But I'll use that stereotype, which could be a man or it could be a woman. Yeah,
okay. I think very often, people are... I guess, first of all, there is a cultural difference in that topic.
Right.
I'm French, and so I come from a Latin country where expressing their emotion is a lot easier. Not always the right way, but definitely easier. And when I moved to Scotland 20 years ago, that was one of the things that surprised me, is that people didn't really express emotion the same way. And at the time, I didn't understand why. So I think there is something particularly in Scotland where, first of all, you are sorry for everything. You apologize for everything. I'm sorry, but even if it's to say something very positive, you are sorry. And that in itself, I think it's about culture and education. I think things are definitely changing. I can see in 20 years the changes in terms of how people express emotions. If you have someone who is struggling to express emotions, it's where actually, and it's not again to say, I don't say that because I'm a coach, but I do believe that coaching is a good way of helping the person understand these mental barriers, this mental block. Because often it's themselves thinking, oh, can I do this or can I do that? It will often be connected to their self-confidence too. It's not always easy because it's about learning to name these emotions. And often people, it's not always because they don't want to express them. It's because they can't name them.
Okay.
So there is quite a lot of work to do to name these emotions. What's the difference between feeling annoyed and feeling angry or feeling frustrated? And I'm giving you only 3, but actually you have an area. It's never black and white. You have so many different shades.
Yeah.
So it's about learning to recognize and name these emotions. So that in itself is quite a lot of work. And then hear yourself saying it. That helps. But the other thing is helping these people to listen to themselves. Now, listening is the key. For me, that's the essence of emotional intelligence. If I had to say what is it, to summarize what is it, for me, this is the art of listening to yourself and to others. And very often we talk about listening to other people. We forgot to learn how to listening to ourselves. And if you listen, if you take the time, if you, even simply closing your eyes and thinking, well, what does that word frustration means? So what do I feel? What is happening when I say the word frustration, or when I say the word joy? What's happening in my body? What's happening in my mind? So it's quite a lot of exercises to do, obviously, but it's, that's the reason why I do believe that this is a skill that needs to be taught at school.
Yeah.
Because because that will serve you all your life. And you still have people who will struggle to express their emotion. It's not to say everybody will be able to do it. But if you have the willingness to learn how to do it, you will do it, because it's a skill you can learn.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of the different skills that you can use, that you use yourself. We were talking about the mindfulness and asking yourself the question. Is there anything else that you do on a frequent basis that you feel helps you to be more emotionally intelligent?
There are a few things. Feedback is very important to me. Asking people how they feel I've done, but not from a technical point of view. So when I do workshop, for example, I guess it's the same for you. You will ask people to give you some feedback or to fill a form, etc. But I will ask them a few questions about the workshop, of course, but I will also ask them about myself and how they felt I was interacting with them, how they felt I was approaching them. So I'm asking them to express also if they had to give 3 words that would give me an insight about how they felt themselves during the workshop. So it's about learning again to express emotion and get some feedback about what emotion you have given to other people. Often a participant will be surprised, but the feedback I have is actually after a few 1 or 2 workshops, they found it easier to do it, because we talked about emotion for several days.
Yeah.
So that's one of the thing I do. To develop, I do a lot of reading, and I guess that's also very important to me, is to learn, particularly when we talk about empathy or mindfulness. Again, there are things you can learn, and you learn by practicing, but for me it's also learning by reading. So at the moment I'm reading 2 books, one which is emotional intelligence coaching. So it's seeing from the coach perspective how they can develop their emotional intelligence, how they go along, how they while they are in the session, being aware of their emotion, being aware of the emotion of other people. There is another book, and I'm not too sure I can pronounce the name of the
Author.
Yeah, author, because it is Vietnamese.
Oh, okay.
He's a Vietnamese monk, and he wrote The Art of Communicating.
Oh, Thich Nhat Hanh.
Ah, good. You can pronounce him.
I only know him because he's a famous one. If I was just reading his name, I'd be like,
That is also very powerful. There are so many things. I mentioned the pausing and learning to be kind with yourself. Learning to tell yourself that you are doing well. To tell yourself, even when there have been, a frustration, for example, when you are in your car driving and this driver in front of you was not quick enough, in your view.
Yeah.
It's really suddenly realizing what you're saying. Oh, right, okay. And it's almost... the word pause always come to my mind, and think, well, actually, yes, I may be 5 minutes late for that meeting, but, that is not the end of the world. And at the end of the day, that guy, that poor guy in front of me, is driving at the right speed, and I don't know his story. So it's putting yourself in the shoes of other people. That's also one of the fundamental of emotional intelligence, is put yourself in the shoes of other people. So if I have been in situation, it's really analyzing, not too much, but analyzing the situation, and tell yourself, preferably in the moment, well, actually, that's fine. That person is angry. Well, if you're angry too, you will go nowhere. So just let that anger go. Just listen listen with intent, don't interrupt, really let that person talk, and don't get in the conversation until he's calmed down. Mm-hmm. And very often, it's learning to be proactive, and not to react to situation all the time. Yeah. And in a world where everything is so quick, we think we don't have the time to pause even for a few seconds, and actually we all have that ability. Mm-hmm. It's learning to take that ability. But no, I will not say the word just now. I will pause and I will let that person talk. Mm-hmm. So it's really, for me, that pause is what I call also, and Stephen Covey called that also, the freedom to choose your response.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of work, because it's a constant work. And I use it a lot. I know when I'm in situation like that, I've got that word freedom, and I'm French, so the word freedom has so many meanings. Freedom, and that was also for me, my idea of Scotland before I moved. The only thing I had seen was freedom. So I thought, we have already something in common. That's that word. So that's my key word, is freedom. When I'm about to react, it's that word, freedom. Mm-hmm. And I will breathe and choose my response, not react to things.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent philosophy. I was actually blogging on that today. Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. I always find it really funny how there's a certain energy that comes into these type of conversations, and it's amazing how you suddenly start finding all these links. So I'm really glad that you brought that up and reaffirmed what's kind of been going through my head today. But talking about going into people's heads, there was something that you said earlier that I think is a really important point. You were talking about bringing emotional intelligence into schools and how this should be taught to people from a young age. And I totally agree. I've worked in schools myself, and I see a lot of low EQ amongst teachers and students, by the way. If you had a 5-year-old in front of you, Anita, and you had to give them some advice on how to be emotionally intelligent and ultimately how that's going to help them through the rest of their lives, what would you say to them?
I'm not sure I would use the word advice. I think for me, that would be to be there when they need you, to answer their question, because at that age, they have many of them, without lying. And that can be tricky. So it's not about dismissing their question, even if you're tired. But it's really about helping them to experiment. So, for example, I remember a situation with my nephew, and my nephew, he was 4 or 5 at the time, and his wee brother had received the same gift than he had, but different color, and he wanted that blue thing. He didn't want the green one, he wanted the blue, and he was very aggressive with him, and to the point that actually my other nephew was crying. And I could have had the reaction to say, give it back to him, and that is it. And, the adult, I'm the one who rules it. You do what I say. And actually, I took him apart. I took him apart. Is it correct in English to say that?
You shouted at him, gave him into trouble.
Yeah, I just thought I'm not saying the right words here. No, I took him in another room, so you see
Right,
nothing
okay.
to do with it. And I asked him, okay, imagine you're your brother. Imagine you have the blue things, and your wee brother was the green thing, and is taking him from you. So how would it make you feel? And actually, I had this conversation with him, and by the end of the conversation, that was amazing how much he understood about himself. I didn't tell him to give it back to his brother, but simply to put him in the other person's shoes, but find his own answers. And he gave it back, but he was able to explain to his brother why he gave it back. Telling him, if you had done that to me, I would be very, very sad. So that's also one of the reasons why what I've done is wrong. And I just thought it's not about giving advice, it's about asking the right question. So maybe it's because I was already a coach.
Yeah.
But I think it's about us asking the right question. Because even at that young age, they will find the answers. You are just here to support them. And okay, if they don't, or if it's really a dangerous situation, you need to guide them clearly. But for me, it's about asking the right questions to help them find their right answers for themselves.
That's interesting. You're the second person so far who has turned that question on its head in that way,
Oh, really?
and
Really?
specifically said, "I'm not going to give them advice. Here's what I'd do instead." So
Right.
yeah, so that's good. I like that. I like to hear a different answer and an answer that doesn't conform to the question and saying, "Well, actually, I think we can reinterpret that." So so thank you for sharing that perspective. That was good to hear.
If I can add one thing is why I avoid, well, why do I do the job of coaching instead of being an advisor, for example? It's simply because I think the difference is about commitment. If the person finds their own answer, if they decide to do something, they commit to themselves. If the answer comes from someone else, it gives them permission not to do it. It's almost, oh, that's not really I'm not really accountable for that. Yeah. So I think it's about being committed to what you're saying. And even at 5, you can be committed to what you're saying.
So Anita, I've got a couple final questions to round off, but just because they're the final few questions, don't feel that you have to give short or succinct answers.
Okay.
The answers are as long as they need to be. The first of these is, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for a lot of things. I'm grateful for the people I've met. I think I'm grateful for the people who made me what I am. And I do believe that the people you meet, if you're listening, if you're curious, will really help you shape what you are. I'm grateful for my parents, actually. I was very, very lucky. I had a mother who was extremely empathic, who was amazing with everybody. I could talk about anything with her. There was no block, no barrier. And actually, sometimes it was a challenge when I was a teenager, because all my friends were coming also to talk to my mom, because we could talk about anything with her. She has no taboo. So sometimes I was kind of jealous, wondering if my pals were coming to see her or me. But she was the most open-minded person I met. And my dad was different because he was a pilot in the army, so quite strict. But it took me a very long time to know him. It took me 30 years actually to know him, and to discover that actually he had so many qualities, so many things to share. That he was an amazing human being too. And someone who actually, and that is a good example about how you can develop emotional intelligence, because when my mom got ill and she had Alzheimer, he really developed these skills. He asked me actually, the thing you do, Anita, can you tell me more about it? You know, he didn't really understand. And we talked a lot, and he became someone so empathic. So he really worked on his empathy to be able to communicate with my mom, because words were not her world anymore. You know, it didn't make sense anymore. So he had to find other ways of being able to communicate and understand her. And he's a very good example of someone who, despite his age, was able to develop this emotional talent. And the last one is also, to be honest, I'm grateful to have been given a second chance, because a while ago I was diagnosed with cancer. And that's when, you know, that's when I discovered coaching, actually. You know, I remember the day where I pushed the door of the Maggie's Centre in Edinburgh, which was heaven. They gave me a lot of support, and they offered counseling, therapy. And at the time, I just felt I really wanted to work on the future. So that's when I discovered for the first time coaching. And that was a revelation. And by the end of the session, that person, that coach, asked me, so now you're clearer about what your future will look like. What is the most important thing to you? And I told him, get your job, become a coach, or seriously. So it has had a big impact also on who I am today. So without this illness, maybe I would still be a coach, I don't know, but it's definitely when I started to reassess a lot more what I was doing. And although I was already in a transition period, that's where I made the decision to completely change what I was doing. So I'm grateful for the people I met and the people I will meet, because there are plenty more.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for my parents, and actually I'm grateful for that illness too.
Yeah.
That sounds silly, but that's the truth.
Well, you preempted my next question somewhat there, because when something like that happens, you get this very stark realization of there's a fragile line between life and death, and we kind of know this rationally. We know that, yeah, I could die any day, one day I'm going to die, but we don't necessarily recognize it emotionally until something like that happens, because one day is going to be our last day. And one day, sadly, will be my last day, it will be your last day, Anita. When that last day comes for you, what legacy do you want to have left?
I think for me, you know, when I think of the word legacy, I think of a tree. I think of something I have planted but not something I may see growing, because I may not be here. And it doesn't matter, because other people will see it grow and will be happy about it. How can I? Actually, I have a wee story. Yeah, if I have time.
Yeah.
It's when I was young, very young, I was 22, and I was a teacher. And in my class, I had this young student who never talked, never heard her voice. And, I was a very young teacher. I didn't have a lot of experience. Clearly, at 22, you don't in the business world or in the teaching world. And I knew I wanted to try to help her. So I spoke to her parents, who told me, well, she's very shy, and we don't know what to do with her. And I just thought, well, I will try a few things if that's okay. I do it for free. It's not the point. It's just I want to help her. And I spent, I don't know how many hours with her after school, try to do storyboard, to do anything to get her to open her mouth. And after a while, she started to talk to me, even if it was just a few words. And I just thought, let's try something new, which is to actually record her voice. So there was a book she liked, and I asked her to read the book, and we could record the book. So she started, it was a lot of negotiation at the time, but she agreed to do it. So we recorded her reading the book, or the story, that wasn't a book. And I played the tape back to her. And that's the first time I saw her smile. And after a few more experience, I asked her to actually let's play that tape in class. So I asked all the other students to do the same type of exercise, because I didn't want her to be, the spotlight, because she was still very shy. And we ran on the tapes, including her. And I remember the other kids were brilliant, because they were very excited hearing her voice, telling her how beautiful her voice was, etc. And suddenly, it was a very different pattern in the class, and she was not that shy. She was able to communicate with people. She wasn't alone anymore. So for me, that was, yes, I made it. But I was still thinking about it, not only to help her, but I was really proud of myself. Years after, in the street of Paris, I heard that voice behind me, Anita, Anita. And I didn't recognize that person. She said, "You were my teacher. You saved me."
Wow.
And I was in tears, honestly, because she grew older. I didn't recognize her. And I always wonder what she became. And she said, what you did for me, I will never forget. And you're my model. And I thought, that's too much. That wasn't the point. But I was so happy. And I reflected on that after. And I was thinking, it doesn't matter if I had never met her. I will have helped that person. I will have helped her. And I didn't believe I changed her life. I do believe she changed it. I just gave her some tools to help her.
Yeah.
And I just supported her. That's what I would like my legacy to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it makes sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Very powerful.
But yeah, that's something I'm actually quite moved.
I can hear it. I'm moved listening to
yeah.
it. I can't believe you met her again. That's
yeah.
I would have burst into tears as well.
I couldn't believe it. It's just that was a wonderful moment to see her as an adult.
Yeah.
She was an adult.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm speechless.
oh, that wasn't the purpose of it.
So I do have one final question for you, Anita.
Yes.
And the real purpose of my work, and ultimately what I want part of my legacy to be, is I want help people be more authentic. I want to help them to be more of who they are and unlock more of the potential that they have within them. And this word and this notion of authentic has been really kind of grasping me the past couple of years as I've been feeling it more in myself and trying to give it to other people. And interestingly, when you look into the root of the word authentic and we start to go down into the Latin and into the Greek root of authentic is author. So to be authentic means to be the author of your own life. And that's the way that I see it, and that's how I interpret it, and that's where Author Your Life has been born from and has grown from. That's the way that I see being authentic, as being the author of your life. It's going back to between stimulus and response, we have the freedom to choose. We can choose what story we want to listen to. We can choose what story we want to be a part of. So that's what it means for me. Mm-hmm. For you, Anita, what does the word authentic mean?
That's, I would say, the most important word in my life. It's a word that it's my motto. Actually, if people ask me what are your values, and if you go to my website, if you read, the first word I use is authenticity. So it's very, very important to me. It has always been, and since I've been very young, according to my parents, I've always been someone who believes in authenticity. For me, it's the ability to connect with people, to be clear about who you are, to not to try to wear a suit that doesn't fit you, not to try to give an image that is not you. For me, whatever I do is what you see is what you get. I will never risk. Is risk the right word? That's something I will never jeopardize. Being authentic is being aware of having a real sense of who you are, your values, your motivation, your talent, your belief, and knowing how important it is to not jeopardize them. So, for example, I've always chosen, when I was working for companies, I didn't really choose the companies. I chose the person I would work with. I chose my boss because that was someone who inspired me. That was someone who was clear about what they wanted in life. That was someone who was able to be interested in other people, with the added bonus of a sense of humor. And it's been the same, when I left job is when I felt that either I couldn't be authentic anymore or people around me weren't authentic. So that's critical to me. It's about being yourself, knowing yourself, being yourself, and be committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's, I guess, how I would describe authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
It's your identity. Authenticity for me is about who you are. your identity.
So Anita, if the people who've been listening to this have enjoyed the things that you've shared and would like to find out a little bit more about who you are, the work that you do, how they can find out more about developing their EQ, where would you direct them to? Where's the best place they can find out more?
The two places. The best place is definitely LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. So I'm Anita Sauvage, MSc. They can find me, and I'm delighted to connect with, connection again with people.
Yeah.
I have also a website. Obviously, it's anitasauvage.com. Or they can contact me also on Facebook at Anita Sauvage and Associates. I don't know if I will give a phone number here, but I think with
Best not in case this podcast gets really big and your voicemail.
Yeah, I think
will get
LinkedIn and my website are definitely enough. And no, I will not give you my address either. I reassure you.
Best not. The EU is really stamping down on the privacy stuff at the moment.
Yes,
so.
yeah, actually, yeah. It's just, as soon as I was saying it, I was thinking, whoa, some flags and alarm bells, thinking, where are you going with that, Anita? No, LinkedIn and my website are definitely the first call.
All right. Well, Anita, thank you very much for coming on today, and I've really enjoyed listening to some of your perspective of how to really gain that deep reflection and that deep self-awareness, which is the core foundation of living an emotionally intelligent life. So I've really enjoyed listening and learning from you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. I love that session with you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
And that's... Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be. Because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.